distinct pleasure and honor today to welcome a fine young woman, an author of the book Dear Martin. I have a few things to share about Ms. Stone, and then we will get started with her presentation. Thank you. Nic Stone was born and raised in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, and the only thing she loves more than an adventure is a good story about one. After graduating from Spelman College, she worked extensively in teen mentoring and lived in Israel for a few years before returning to the U.S. to write full-time. Growing up with a wide range of cultures, religions, and backgrounds, Stone strives to bring these diverse voices and stories to her work. She is the author of the best-selling novel, Dear Martin, which is currently on the bestseller list and sold out at least one Barnes & Noble that I know of. Without further ado, Nic Stone.
Hi. Yeah, I wrote a book. It's weird. So today we are celebrating MLK Day, and it is a day of remembrance. This day is about remembering the legacy of Dr. King, right? But memory can be kind of a tricky thing. I go into a lot of schools, a lot of middle schools, a lot of high schools, and when I ask kids, who is Dr. King? What do you know about Dr. King? They always mention the high points. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. He had the I Have a Dream speech. He fought for justice, and he did all of these amazing things during the Civil Rights Movement. And we have this tendency as human beings, I gotta flip my note cards, guys, sorry. We have this tendency, though, when it comes to memory, to only focus on the good stuff. I remember I was 9 years old, and my mom was at work, and there was this time that I decided I was going to go roller skating, and I was 9. I had my friend's mom drop me off at the roller skating rink without telling my mom. And I remember having fun at the roller skating rink, but I also remember the behind whooping I got when I had to call my mama to come pick me up because I hadn't considered how I was going to get home. And I don't like remembering what happened once she got me home, but I will say that I never did it again. And I say all that to say, even the painful memories that we have, the memories that are uncomfortable, the memories that, sorry, I'm totally walking out of frame, the memories that make us uncomfortable are just as important as the good ones. So, like I said, we have a tendency to kind of avoid or gloss over things that make us uncomfortable or things that remind us of pain. And this is honestly especially true when it comes to history. I remember being a 16-year-old kid in a U.S. history class. I was the only black kid in the class. And what I remember most about that class is how little we actually talked about slavery. There was probably 2 paragraphs in the entire history textbook dedicated to the discussion of slavery. And looking back, like, I understand that we don't really want to talk about slavery because it's ugly. It's something that people would rather forget. I remember being, this is like a month ago, I was on an airplane talking to this man who had just finished basic training. We were talking about the Take a Knee movement going on. And he literally said to me, no offense, but I mean, I wish you guys would just kind of stop talking about the slavery thing. It was a long time ago. And the thing is, though, there are still residual effects of slavery. We're still interacting with each other based on these paradigms and these ideologies that made slavery possible. So it's like, yeah, slavery's not here anymore, but the attitudes that made slavery a possibility, they still pervade. So in this class, I just remember being there and sitting there and thinking about how little I was learning about, like, my own people, right? And what was interesting, the most interesting thing to me about this class was that my teacher was an Indian American man. He was a naturalized Indian American man. He had been an immigrant. And looking back, it's amazing to me that he never actually pointed that out. Like, he never remarked on it. There was never a moment where he stopped to look at it as a way of, like, seeing how far we'd come, you know? Ruby Bridges, who is still alive, by the way. This is the young lady who in 1960 desegregated schools in the American South. She went to elementary school. She was the first African-American person. Brown versus Board of Education was passed in the mid-50s. This is 1960. First person ever to go into a formerly all-white school. 40 years later, we're sitting in this classroom with people of all colors in it, and we have this man who was once an immigrant teaching the class, and yet we didn't talk about that. You know, I think you would think that like we'd be willing to talk about these kind of signs of progress, but we weren't willing to because it's painful to think about the fact that there was a point where schools were segregated. There was a point where, you know, Ruby Bridges had to be walked into school by the National Guard because of people's anger over her being there. And she's still alive. That's the most amazing thing to me. She's like my dad's age. This isn't something that was ages and ages and eons ago. You know, Ruby Bridges is still doing her thing. She's still, you know, fighting for justice because this wasn't that long ago. So we have to be careful about what we focus on these days of remembrance. Even today, the history of MLK Day, there are things about it that we don't actually talk about. It was originally proposed in 1968. Miss Coretta started this petition to get a national holiday in honor of Dr. King. And it took until 1979 for them to get enough support to make it to Congress. The petition had 3 million signatures on it, and it was still voted down. Next year, 1980, it got back. It made it back to Congress, made it back to another vote with 6 million signatures on the petition. And it passed, but there were people who voted it down. There were some senators who voted it down, and this is actually, I love this. One of the senators who voted it down ran for president in 2008 and lost to the first black man to ever win. So, you know, I can appreciate the karma there. I bet John McCain would prefer that we not remember that he voted against MLK Day. But yeah, so even this day, getting this day on the calendar was a long, hard battle because there were people who didn't want it. And it's important that we think about these things, that we remember these things. Stevie Wonder, the song Happy Birthday. Anybody black in this room, we all sing it. When it's after we sing one version, we sing the other one. But that song was written in 1980 to rally support for MLK Day. A lot of people don't know that. So this is another thing that like we don't fight to remember. And like I said, it passed the House. John McCain voted against it, but it made it finally. So in 1983, it was signed into law by Jimmy Carter, I believe. Oh, Ronald Reagan signed it into law. And then it was first celebrated nationally in 1986. And I was 6 months old, so I don't remember. But 3 years between it being signed into law. And like, it's like that, I find. Like, when you look back over U.S. history, things will pass, things will move, people will vote for things, and then it takes some time for them to actually come to fruition. But the year that it did, the year that it was first celebrated, 1986, Elie Wiesel was the winner of the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize. And he won the Nobel Peace Prize. He was a Holocaust survivor who fought his entire life to make sure nobody forgot the Holocaust. And something that he said during his lecture was that the memory of evil will serve as a shield against evil. And to me, it's really important. And it says a lot to me that he made this statement the first year that we celebrated a day to remember what Dr. King did. Because, you know, like I said, it's important that we think about the hard stuff. It does seem like, pause. Well, hello. It does seem like in recent years, there's a lot that we've forgotten, or that we don't, I should say there's a lot that we don't want to remember, especially in terms of race relations. I think part of the reason that teacher of mine did not mention anything about him being Indian American, anything about, you know, how remarkable it was that an Indian American man was teaching a U.S. history class at a diverse school. He didn't. I think part of the reason he didn't mention that is because, you know, for the past little while, we've kind of been in this age of, like, quote, colorblindness, where we don't want to acknowledge each other's differences. And honestly, that's not really what... When I have the opportunity to talk to people, one of the first things I tend to say to them is, like, forget the idea of colorblindness. Don't be colorblind. Like, I want people to see my color because I want people to see that I experience life differently from them. That's what happens. When you notice that somebody else looks different from you, you notice and you recognize. It's a recognition of the fact that what they go through, what they live, is completely different from what you go through and what you live. And I mean, the past 6 years, specifically, starting in 2012, we've seen, and I think honestly it's a lot of it is thanks to the internet and the media, but we've seen a lot of very terrible things happening, especially to young African American males. I have 2 little boys. One of them is 5.5, going on 25, if you ask him. And the other one is 1.5, going on 30. They are really something. They're both very strong-willed, very stubborn. And my older one was 5 months old when Jordan Davis was killed in Jacksonville, Florida. Jordan Davis was in a car with his friends, for those of you not familiar with the story. He's in a car, an SUV with his friends, and they had their music turned up really loud. Another person pulled in next to them, didn't like the fact that their music was loud. Some words were exchanged, and the guy who pulled in next to them opened fire, and Jordan Davis was killed. My little boy at that point was 5 months old, and it was the first time it occurred to me that there are little black children, boys, girls even, but boys specifically, who people look at and they see threats before they see kids. You know, this kid was 17. He's still a child. There's a problem with how young black men specifically are perceived in this country. And this is why I decided to write this book. Knowing what I know about how society functions, because my dad was a cop, which made all of this very interesting. I grew up with a cop for a father, and he and I had to sit down and have some conversations. Up until I was 24, 25, I did see police officers as heroes, because when I saw somebody in uniform, I saw my dad. But then when I started hearing about all of these things going on, like Mike Brown, when Mike Brown was killed, y'all, when I tell you, it just threw my world into a tailspin, because the idea of somebody that I would expect to protect and to be there to help, taking the life of a person with no weapon, I didn't really know what to do with that. So I started doing some research. Around the same time, the Black Lives Matter movement kicked off. And the more research I did, and the more intense the Black Lives Matter movement got, the more I kept hearing people quote Dr. King in opposition to the Black Lives Matter movement. And that says a lot to me. The fact that we look at things going on, this is a nonviolent protest movement, is what the Black Lives Matter movement is and was. And the fact that you had people quoting Dr. King, saying he would be appalled, this isn't the tactic he would use. I remember, I'm from Atlanta, and there was a point when the mayor of my own city, this is the city where Dr. King was born and raised, this man said Dr. King would never take a freeway. That is a quote. Like, he said, please don't take the freeways. Dr. King would never take a freeway. But that's not true. He took freeways all the time. And that says a lot to me about what we're not remembering. Selma, there are pictures of masses of people crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, taking a freeway, you know? So there's this sanitization, I feel, that has happened over the past few years. And I really want to make sure that in my writing and with my stories, that I am actually paying true homage to the people that I'm writing about. And Dr. King is kind of, so in this book, basically this book is about this 17-year-old kid who, there's a night that he's racially profiled. His ex-girlfriend has had too much to drink, and he goes to try and keep her from driving. In the process of putting her inside her car so that he can drive her home, a police officer pulls up, assumes he's trying to carjack her, and arrests him. And he is forced to sit on the ground in handcuffs for hours. In response to this event, he decides that he's going to start a journal of letters written to the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., more or less to see how Dr. King's teachings will hold up here now in the 21st century. And so he says it, for him, it's like this social experiment where he decides that he's going to think about what Martin would do and try to do that and see where it gets him. And so the premise of this book is really me trying to explore that question of like, well, what would Martin do if he were alive today? And like, what did he do back then? Because it's something that that we're losing our grip on, I personally feel. So some things that I really want us to remember today, specifically as it is Dr. King's, it's his birthday. It is literally his birthday today. This is only the fourth time in history, in the history of the holiday, that it's actually fallen on his birthday. He would have been 89 years old today. And in light of that, some things that I think we should constantly be thinking about. So like, we'll set the fire today and just to chew on some of this stuff. Like, for instance, his house was firebombed multiple times during the Civil Rights Movement. Dr. King's house was. The FBI bugged his house because they saw him as a threat. So there's this idea, I find that there's this idea that he was this hyper peaceful man who never like ruffled any feathers. Like, I've heard people say, there was a quote, I can't remember who said it. It might have been Bill O'Reilly. I think it was Bill O'Reilly. But basically, the crux of what he was saying is that Dr. King would not have caused this much disorder. But that's not true. Dr. King caused a lot of disorder. And it's not that he caused the disorder, it's that the people who didn't like what he was trying to accomplish were causing the disorder. But that's what civil disobedience is. Civil disobedience is, you know, it's about agitation. You do things nonviolently, but that doesn't mean it's peaceful technically, but it doesn't mean peace and order are not synonymous. So his house was firebombed, the FBI was after him. There were people firmly in opposition to what he was doing, what he was trying to accomplish, because they didn't want things to change. And there were defamation campaigns. In Birmingham, there was a church that was bombed. 4 little girls were killed. The Children's Crusade of not going to quote the date because I'm probably going to be wrong. But there was a Children's Crusade in Birmingham where Bull Connor, the head guy in charge, he like let loose police dogs and fire hoses on these kids and arrested kids. Like it wasn't something. The civil rights movement was not something that was like happy all the time. As a matter of fact, it was pretty miserable. And so as we celebrate him today, I think we have to, you know, really make sure that we're paying attention to the misery that he kind of suffered. I was talking to this guy at the airport last night. He was telling me about Dr. King's final year of life. I think it was like something like a year to the day before he was assassinated in Memphis. He gave a talk on kind of in opposition to the Vietnam War. And then this final year of his life was just miserable. You know, like he had all of these, he was being pulled in a lot of different directions. And it was actually suggested that he not go to Memphis because, you know, he went to Memphis. He was in Memphis to help sanitation workers in their union because they wanted to go on strike. So he was there in support of them, but there were people who didn't want him to do that because they didn't feel it was high profile enough. He went anyway and he was assassinated. But that says a lot, the fact that he was assassinated, you know? There were so many people opposed to what he was doing, they were willing to kill him. The letter from a Birmingham jail was written from jail. And I find that people like, I remember I said this in a middle school. I was like, guys, the letter from a Birmingham jail was written from jail. And they were like, what? And I was like, that means he got arrested. And it was just this light bulb. Like it never clicked for them that he had been in jail when he wrote this because he had gotten arrested, which means people were saying he was doing something wrong. We just have to be willing to look at these very ugly things. Look around at the upheaval going on now. You know, Black Lives Matter ruffles feathers. Take a knee ruffles feathers, but so did everything back then too. And I know it can be difficult to come to terms with the idea of kind of shifting a status quo, because I don't know, I think about the status quo like gravity. Like, I can move around up here in these ridiculous shoes because I know how gravity functions. But if gravity were to shift at all, like if it were to like lessen or get more intense, I would be tripping all over myself, or I'd be floating to the ceiling and I'd have to learn how to move again. And honestly, that's kind of how the status quo works, I think. We learn how to interact with each other and how to be based on like social norms. Like, these are the things that you're allowed to do, these are the things you're not allowed to do. So when you start trying to shift those around, it makes people uncomfortable. But we still have to do it, you know? He had to do it. He had to shift things around so that we could honestly all be in this room together today. Something that he said that I want to point out. I have almost come to the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice. Honestly, it can be expanded now. It's not just the white moderate. Like, I know some black people who are more devoted to order than they are to justice. I know people of all races who are more devoted to order than they are to justice. But when we remember him, I guess the question is, like, what are we going to choose to remember? As we think about what he accomplished, we got to remember what it took to accomplish it. Because the fight's not over, you know? There's still police brutality going on. There's still serious, serious flaws in our criminal justice system. You still have kids being tried as adults. You still have, you know, boys who commit 2 crimes and are labeled career criminals because of the color of their skin. There are discrepancies in drug use numbers versus drug arrest numbers. People of color tend to get sentenced more intensely than people who are not of color. And these are things that we have to be aware of and to continue to fight against, because honestly, that's what I think he would do. And we can't lose hope. As Elie Wiesel said during his acceptance speech, there may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest. And that is a vital thing to remember on this day of remembrance for Martin Luther King Jr. So happy 89th birthday to him. Questions? Anything?
Now, I started reading the book.
Yes.
And I recognize that the main character's name is Justice.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that is for a specific reason, but can you?
Yeah, it's definitely a double entendre. I can read. Do you want me to like read the first chapter of the book? I can do that. There's some cussing, so just so you know. Just so you know, I know we're all, none of us ever cuss in this room, right? Okay. From where he's standing across the street, Justice can see her. Mello Taylor, ex-girlfriend, slumped over beside her bins on the damp concrete of the Farm Fresh parking lot. She's missing a shoe, and the contents of her purse are scattered around her like the guts of a pulled party popper. He knows she's stone drunk, but this is too much, even for her. Justice shakes his head, remembering the judgment all over his best friend Manny's face as he left Manny's house not 15 minutes ago. The walk symbol appears. As he approaches, she opens her eyes, and he waves and pulls his earbuds out just in time to hear her say, "What the hell are you doing here?" Justice asks himself the same question as he watches her try and fail to shift to her knees. She falls over sideways and hits her face against the car door. He drops down and reaches for her cheek, which is as red as the candy apple paint job. "Damn, Mello, are you okay?" She pushes his hand away. "What do you care?" Stung, Justice takes a deep breath. He cares a lot, obviously. If he didn't, he wouldn't have walked a mile from Manny's house at 3 a.m. Manny's of the opinion that Mello's the worst thing that ever happened to Justice, so of course he refused to give his boy a ride. All to keep his drunken disaster of an ex from driving. He should walk away right now, Justice should. But he doesn't. "Jessa called me," he tells her. "That skank. Don't be like that, babe. She only called me because she cares about you." Jessa had planned to take Mello home herself, but Mel threatened to call the cops and say she'd been kidnapped if Jessa didn't drop her at her car. Mello can be a little dramatic when she's drunk. "I'm totally unfollowing her," she says. Case in point. "In life and online. Nosy bitch." Justice shakes his head again. I just came to make sure you get home okay. That's when it hits Justice that while he might succeed in getting Mello home, he has no idea how he'll get back. He closes his eyes as Manny's words ring through his head. This Captain Save-A-Ho thing is going to get you in trouble, dog. He looks Mello over. She's now sitting with her head leaned back against the car door, half asleep with her mouth open. He sighs. Even drunk, Justice can't deny Mello's the finest girl he's ever laid eyes, not to mention hands on. She starts to tilt, and Justice catches her by the shoulder to keep her from falling. She's startled, looking at him wide-eyed, and just can see everything about her that initially caught his attention. And that's part of his problem. He gets too tripped up by how beautiful she is. He never dreamed a girl as fine as her would be into him. Now he's got the urge to kiss her, even though she smells like vodka and cigarettes and weed, and her hair's a mess. But when he goes to push her hair out of her face, she shoves his hand away again. Don't touch me, Justice. Ugh, where are my keys? Justice spots them in front of the back tire and snatches them up. You're not driving, Mello. Give them. She swipes for the keys, but falls into his arms instead. Justice props her against the car again and gathers the rest of her stuff to put it back in her bag. Then everything goes really wrong really fast. First, she throws up all over the hoodie Justice is wearing, which belongs to Manny, who specifically said, "Don't come back here with throw up on my hoodie." Perfect. Justice takes the sweatshirt off and tosses it in the back seat. When he tries to pick Mello up again, she slaps him. Hard. "Leave me alone, Justice," she says. "I can't do that, Mel. There's no way you'll make it home if you try to drive yourself." He tries to lift her by her armpits, and she spits in his face. He considers walking away again. He could call her parents, stick her keys in his pocket, and bounce. Oak Ridge is probably the safest neighborhood in Atlanta. She'd be fine for the 25 minutes it would take Mr. Taylor to get here. But he can't. Despite Manny's assertion that Mello needs to, quote, suffer some consequences for once, leaving her here all alone doesn't seem like the right thing to do. So he picks her up and tosses her over his shoulder. Mello responds in her usual delicate fashion. She screams and beats him on the back with her fists. Justice struggles to get the back door open and is lowering her into the car when he hears the whoop of a short siren and sees the blue lights. In the few seconds it takes the police car to screech to a stop behind him, Justice settles Mello into the back seat. Now she's gone catatonic. Justice can hear the approaching footsteps, but he stays focused on getting Mello strapped in. He wants it to be clear to the cop that she wasn't going to drive, so she won't be in even worse trouble. Before he can get his head out of the car, he feels a tug on his shirt and is yanked backwards. His head smacks the door frame just before a hand clamps down on the back of his neck. His upper body slams into the trunk with so much force, he bites the inside of his cheek and his mouth fills with blood. Justice swallows, head spinning, unable to get his bearings. The sting of cold metal around his wrists pulls him back to reality. Handcuffs. It hits him. Mello is drunk beyond belief in the backseat of a car she fully intended to drive, yet Justice is the one in handcuffs. The cop shoves him to the ground beside the police cruiser and asks if Justice understands his rights. Justice doesn't remember hearing any rights, but his ears had been ringing from the 2 blows to the head, so maybe he missed them. He swallows more blood. "Officer, this is a big misunderstanding," he starts to say, but he doesn't get to finish because the cop hits him in the face. "Don't you say shit to me, you son of a bitch. I knew your punk ass was up to no good when I saw you walking down the road with that goddamn hood on." So the hood was a bad idea. Earbuds, too. Probably would have noticed he was being trailed without them. "But officer, you keep your mouth shut." The cop squats and gets right in Justice's face. "I know you're kind. Punks like you wander the streets of nice neighborhoods searching for prey. Just couldn't resist the pretty girl who locked her keys in the car, could ya?" Except that doesn't even make sense. If Mel had locked her keys in the car, Justice wouldn't have been able to get her inside of it, would he? Justice finds the officer's nameplate. Castillo, it reads, though the guy looks like a regular white dude. Mama told him how to handle this situation, though he must admit he never expected to actually need the advice. Be respectful, keep the anger in check, make sure the police can see your hands, though that's impossible right now with the handcuffs. "Officer Castillo, I mean you no disrespect. I told your punk ass to shut the fuck up." He wishes he could see Mello, get her to tell this cop the truth, but the dude is blocking his view. Now, if you know what's good for you, you won't move or speak. Resistance will only land you in deeper shit. Got it? Cigarette breath and flecks of spit hit Justice's face as the cop speaks, but Justice fixes his gaze on the glowing green F of the Farm Fresh sign. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, boy." He grabs Justice's chin. "I asked you a question." Justice swallows, meets the cold blue of Officer Castillo's eyes, and clears his throat. "Yes, sir," he says. "I got it." So that situation is actually pulled from, not exactly, but like my little brother. I have a brother who is 29. And when he was 17, he got stopped at a Taco Bell just randomly one night. And my brother is 6'3". He was 6'3" at that point too. And I just remember him. I wasn't there, so I don't know. I don't even know exactly what happened. All I know is that when he got home, he was shook. Like I had never seen my brother look so stark and so shell-shocked. And, like I said, our dad was a cop. So he had no idea how to even process what had happened. And, this is happening to boys all over, and girls. It's happening to girls too. Every time I go into a school, one of the things I'll ask them, I'll say, how many of you have been followed around a grocery store? Every brown hand in the room goes up, literally every time. And I start asking them, you ask them like some of the things that they've had to deal with, and you guys would be appalled at some of the stuff these kids are going through. And I understand why there's a need for things like Black Lives Matter. I understand why there's a need for things like Take a Knee. Like we have come far, but we haven't come as far as we can or as we need to. And part of the reason I really wanted to address Dr. King in this book is because there are a lot of people who would say, oh, well, we're done, we're good. We're colorblind. I remember when President Obama got elected, the term post-racial society like magicked itself into the air. And it's a very strange thing to hear. I lived in Israel for a few years. And while I was there, my job, I was a tour operator. So I designed tours. I had designed Holy Land tours, largely for Americans. And I had this group of congressmen who came over to Israel for a tour. And one of their interns was on the trip with them. And I remember, I don't even know how race came up. Like, I'm this African-American girl running an Israeli tour in Hebrew, like on a bus. Like, why are we talking about American race relations? But anyway, it came up, and something that he said was, and he was my age. He was like, I feel like America's a pretty colorblind place now. And like, I look back and I'm like, well, actually, I wasn't really in America then, so I don't know that I could have properly answered. But I kind of wish I could talk to that guy now and see if he says the same thing. What do y'all think? I know typically you don't have speakers like asking you questions, but I'm curious because when I find myself in rooms of mixed company, I want to know what's on your minds on this MLK Day. How do y'all feel about race relations right now?
You mean Robert E. Lee Day? Or are you talking about Martin King Day?
I'm talking about Martin Luther King Day.
Well, what you were saying about this sanitization of the feminine, I didn't have that.
Good.
When I was growing up, trust me, that's all you saw. That's all you saw were those images of violence, the lynching, the spitting, just various images. You didn't even have a sense that people of color had any sense of peace or happiness. That being said, what I've noticed lately, some of the images in media, aside from the news facts, the entertainment, it's just, for example, Weeds. Familiar with that show?
Yeah.
Breaking Bad.
Mm-hmm.
Girls. Nurse Jackie. These are all glorified drug dealers.
Yeah.
But because they're white, it's provocative. It's sexy. It's daring. It's different. Everyone kept talking about girls. Now, I was living overseas when girls became popular. I came back and said, I gotta check this out. I said, she's a hoe. I'm sorry. She was doing, it was just, I'm like, she's just an average-sized chick screwing every guy who walks across her path, but because she's white, it's okay. But then you take these same characters and you place them in a different context. No one's winning any awards. No one's getting acclamations. No one's getting recognized. No one's getting glorified, which I don't agree with that either. Like I said, Nurse Jackie. She's a drug addict, philandering, cheating on her husband, lying to everyone. But again, in this Somehow it's glorified. You take that same image and you apply it to a person of color, she'd be a horrible mom, of course, on top of everything, but she's a great mom. She's a great mom. But we can't take care of our kids have to be taken away from us, you know, we're draining the government for assistance. So I see what you're saying, and it definitely bears a sense of a platform. But I also see the consumption and where in different areas it's okay.
Yeah.
Which makes it easier for people to say to you, oh, we live in post color America. And to that end, I have a lot of my friends still say, he wasn't black. He was only half black. Which, you know, is a whole nother conversation. But I'm just coming from the point of we're still consuming it.
Yeah.
Graciously.
Yeah. And you're right about the double standard. Something else that I try to touch on in this book specifically is the double standard that you see when an African American teenager is killed. The images that are portrayed of the kid after their death, you typically are only going to see. Like, I remember when Trayvon was killed, the main picture of him was him kind of looking mean in a hoodie. And then I saw pictures circulating of him like flipping the camera off. And so there is this thing that happens where it's almost like an attempt to justify an untimely death. But this is also something that we have to be fighting against, you know? I think this is also something that we have to make sure that we're calling out. Like, we have to be willing to be uncomfortable in order for actual change to occur, because if not, like, what's the point, you know? Like, I don't think that, I do think that if Dr. King were alive today, something he would say to us is that we all need to, like, get our lives, like, we need to, like, get ourselves together, examine our own hearts, examine our own minds, check our own biases, you know? Like, if for him the highest goal was love, right? He constantly said that. He just wanted to love everyone and for everyone to love each other. But that does involve kind of unpacking your own stuff. And I hope that as the day goes on and as people are remembering him, that we examine ourselves, what we're willing to think about, what we're not willing to think about. We examine the accomplishments in light of what it took to get them accomplished. Even thinking about the Civil Rights Act of, 1963? 64? Yeah. Yeah. It was very pretty on paper. But it took a while for that stuff to really come to fruition, you know. It took until after his death for a lot of the stuff that we're actually seeing come to bear now, like the Equal Housing Act, all of the things, the discrimination that was still legal there was no legislation passed against it until after he was killed. Like, so there are things like this that I think we have to really think about why they are that way. Why were they that way? What are the things now that still look like that, and how do we stand against it? It's illegal to discriminate now, but all that really means is, like, I can sue you. So, like, if I go into your store and you don't serve me, I can take you to court. It doesn't mean that you can't keep harboring those attitudes in your heart. And I think Charlottesville, how far is Charlottesville from here? 2 hours. Like, it's so close, you know? And what happened there, and some of the stuff I heard when people would talk about those rallies and the young lady who was hit by the car, I kept hearing people say, I can't believe they had the audacity to come out. And I'm like, but you're okay with him having the audacity in their house? Like, I don't know, maybe that's just me, but like, there's this desire to keep things kind of covered over. Like, we're just not going to talk about these things. They probably exist, but we're going to pretend like they don't until it all kind of bubbles up. And honestly, I feel like that's how nonviolent protest works. You expose the things that need to be exposed, and then people react. And that's really where the change begins. Anybody else got questions? Yes.
I feel like SJ was kind of like the moral conscience of your book.
Uh-huh.
Is that what you want your readers? Like, is that kind of the ideal that you're almost holding out to your readers? Because I feel like
Yeah.
she's really reactive, and she's
Yeah.
one of the few characters who's proactive and willing to call people on their craft.
Yes. So SJ is interesting. She is, for those of you who haven't read the book, she is one of the love interests. She's the kind of antithesis to the girl we just heard about in the first chapter. She's a Jewish American girl, and she is very woke. And she's white on purpose. Like, I made her white on purpose, and I gave the white girl the strength, because then white people listen to her. There's this thing where, and honestly, this is kind of across the board. We're more likely to listen to the people we can identify with. I think it's just kind of human nature, you know? It's instinctive to look at the person who looks like you and be more willing to hear what they're saying than to hear what somebody who doesn't look like you is saying. So really, she is there as kind of the like, hey, white people, listen. And she's more me than anything. Which is, you know, a confession, I guess. This is the beauty of being a writer. I can put myself into any kind of packaging. But yeah, she does serve as this voice of reason and logic. And I think that's my favorite thing about her, is that she's very logical, and she breaks things down logically. And there's a lot of debate in the book. Both Justice, the main character, and their debate partners. So they're used to taking things and picking them apart and arguing them kind of rationally. So, did you like her? Yeah? Good. Did you like her?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. And like I said when I was talking to you yesterday, that I could see a lot of myself in your characters
Uh-huh.
in terms of my life experience. And I always tell people it's not your outer persona that determines how you interact with others. It's your actual experiences that should inform how you interact with others. And so I went to Catholic school. You know, I'm not Catholic. I was probably the only black kid in my class in a lot of my classes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, to even be in this space as a profession where the majority of the faculty and staff are non-people of color speaks volumes. But it's part of my history and part of my experience. And so when we're dealing with each other, we have to look at each other, A, at face value, and B, we are in this together. This is a collective. This is not one person just running the show and doing their thing. This is a collective. We've got students that we've got to send out into the world prepared as young professionals, as culturally aware, able to interact in multiple venues and spaces with each other.
Yeah. I don't have anything to add. Anybody else got questions?
When you look at the news, look at the world, and everything in the world today, who do you see as the voice of reason? I like the way you put that, like everyone is the voice of reason. Or where do you think our areas where you find the voice of reason? It's like a lot of crazy things going on. Like, you watch Obama presidency, you watch Trump presidency, he's going to criticize, he's going to condemn for certain things. And overall, the media keeps like, keeps my president at his but where do you think that voice of reason comes in at just generally speaking?
To be frank, I don't know that there is one right now. I think that there are individual pockets of reason, but until we get to a point where we're willing to actually listen to each other, there really isn't one. And I do say this as somebody who I, at this point, consume as little news media as possible, because it is so confusing and so, like, bipartisan. And, this group is saying everything on this end, that group is saying everything, and there's nothing in the middle. Like, it's intensely overwhelming for me. News media right now is super it's very overstimulating. But there are activists that I follow and listen to. Like, I really love Sean King. I think Sean King is, and I'm probably biased because he is in Atlanta, but like I do like a lot of the things that he has to say. And I also really love Ta-Nehisi Coates. Like, he is a man who, that man is a thinker, and that is something that we really, really need right now. Especially, we have this very reactive media culture. Twitter is this thing where, okay, there's this thing happening. I have 30 seconds and 160 characters to respond. Actually, I think it's 280 now, and 280 characters to respond. Nobody's actually getting the time to process things or to think. We're not thinking and trying to figure out, like, okay, wait, what's actually logical here? So hopefully, as time progresses, we will continue. Colin Kaepernick's also really great. The ladies who started Black Lives Matter, I think they're really great. I think that so you see most of my voices of reason are involved in activism, so that's my personal leaning. But I do think that it's also up to us, you know? Like, I think it's up to us to be reasonable and to have conversations with each other, especially in spaces like this. You know, we have people across races in this room, and we can sit and we can talk about racism, we can talk about race, we can talk about anything involved in that particular sphere in a very civil way. You know, we're all in here, we're all thinking individuals, and we can have just open discourse. And I think we just need to take the opportunity to do that more often. Did that answer your question at all?
Yeah, it was just kind of open-ended question. I know, like, as a writer, as a content creator, so it's always one.
Yeah. Cool.
I'm intrigued by your background, born and raised in Atlanta, and then spending time in Israel.
Yeah.
And I was just in the Middle East for several years, and the interesting component where we were is that there were so many different nationalities that no one thing stood out. So you talked about that you don't really like color blindness. What is the ideal? What is that picture that we should be shooting for?
I think for me, the ideal is seeing each other, period. Looking at, okay, and not only seeing each other, but like kind of an other-centeredness. My ideal is stepping into a room, I meet 5 people, and I get to know 5 new things about them. That does take time. It does take effort, but that's time and effort that I'm willing to invest in order to, like, hopefully make the world better just by creating new relationships. Israel was weird for me, especially as an African-American woman, with a Christian background. So Israel was like, it was wild. Like, I had friends on both sides of the wall, and I had to get out of there. Like, it was overwhelming how, like, we think things are divisive here. Man, like, Israel is quite a place. But I will say, having traveled and lived other places, we're doing pretty good when it comes to race relations, because we're at least willing to like admit that we have a problem. You know, there are other places in the world. Racism's a problem anywhere there are people of different colors. It just is. It's just kind of as a result of colonialism, and I'm not going to bore us to tears with all of this history, but like, it's a problem anywhere that you have people of different colors. The fact that here in this country we're willing to be like, this is racist, it puts us light years ahead of so much of the rest of the world. So, like, you know, I guess it's something to take heart in. What country were you in? Oh yeah. That place seems so cool.
But even the Palestinians, I mean,
Uh-huh.
the Palestinians are all different colors, shapes, and sizes, but they have a history that they adhere to and want to voice. Yeah.
It's rough.
But the school I worked in had probably 60 different nationalities, but what we noticed, my kids talk, and I talk about this a lot, is that there was so much difference that nothing stood out, and it was sort of this celebration. Like,
That's amazing.
you didn't see somebody for they were on the outside, you saw them for the, like you said, for
Yeah.
for who they were, for where they came from what their background were. There wasn't an instant judgment because everybody was different.
Yeah. I just wish that, but see, and then you have these like microcosms that are like that, because my high school was like that. I had the best time in high school, besides being the only black kid in my classes. That was the worst. But with regard to like socially, it was a very fun time because I was always surrounded by people from different places. But as soon as I left, it's like you step out of that microcosm and it's like, whoa, how do we even deal with all of this? I don't have an answer to that. Yeah. Anybody else?
The
Yeah.
answer will come if you change in your heart.
Yeah.
That's the answer. And I just wish we could be like children again.
Yeah, that'd be
That's
great.
the key. You notice when children are deaf, they're not worried about all that.
Yeah.
They see the, we just simply.
Yeah. Adults, we just mess everything up. Yeah, another question?
This is kind of going back into the book, but I've read your book and I've also read The Hate You Give.
Mhm.
And you both chose, you and Andrew Thomas both chose very similar settings.
Yeah.
I was wondering why you chose that setting, or
I mean, for me, it was about, the reason I wrote the book, my book is like anti-respectability politics. Like that's like the crux of the book. I think the takeaway that I intended, which honestly doesn't matter because whatever you take away from it is what, books belong to their readers type thing. But I intended for the takeaway to be no matter what or how hard or how great a black male does or how hard he works, there will still be people who hate him. So this idea that like if you do good and you go to school and you learn, like you'll be fine, like people are going to respect you, like it's not automatic. It's not that automatic, and that is really my kind of kick toward people who, a kid has gone down and they're like, well, if he would have just done what the cop said, or well, if he wouldn't have been sagging his pants, like these little silly things that honestly don't matter at all. This book was my way of being like, here, look, this is a kid who's done everything right. Now what? And it is very realistic. Now what? Yeah. So Angie and I are really good friends, by the way. She chose her setting because it was her life. She grew up in an area kind of like Garden Heights and went to Bellhaven? A Bell something college where she was on scholarship and one of the only black people. And so she had this kind of double life, just like started, where she had kind of a foot in both worlds. The person she was in one area was different from the person she was at school. So that's why I know that's why she chose her setting for The Hate You Give. Yeah, that was a good question. Yeah. Anybody else?
What do you think about Black Lives Matter when you hear people say all lives matter, which we know they do, but the lack of understanding, what you tell them?
Stop. Like, yeah, you're missing the point. But honestly, the people who say that don't want to see the point. So I don't have anything to say. I feel like they're, yeah. Well, but see, I don't know. I don't even know if I buy that it's a lack of understanding, because there's so much information available that if you don't understand, you're being ignorant. It's how I feel about it.
So it's the desire to not understand.
Yeah, it's you have the opportunity to understand it, but most of the people that I have interacted with that say, when I say Black Lives Matter, they say all lives matter, they have a very specific way of thinking, and they have a very specific paradigm that they are not willing to step out of. If people aren't willing to be wrong, I have nothing to say to you. You're right. Bye.
Well, don't you believe that there is a distinct difference between logically understanding something on paper and gaining the facts and saying, okay, this adds up, this does not?
Absolutely.
Versus actually, like seeing your brother come home that night, actually having that internal connection, that internal experience. Those two are very, very, very different.
Absolutely.
And I do believe that a lot of people do feel they understand. But again, there's a big difference from, you said you were one of few or the only black child in school. Not many people know what that feels like.
True.
And I remember being on the beach when I was living in France. I was with a German friend, and we were having very much the same conversation. And to illustrate my point, I said to her, we were sitting at a restaurant on the beach, and I said to her, do you notice I'm the only black person here?
Had she noticed?
And, she broke her neck. She actually got up and walked around looking for someone else. My point was, this is not new to me.
Right,
But clearly, you've never been in this situation.
right, right.
That's my point.
Now, the beauty of your friend was she was actually willing to empathize with you. A lot of people, but there are so many people who aren't willing to step into somebody else's shoes. This is what I think, this is what I feel, and I'm not budging. And I interact with these people actually, I don't interact with them because they'll try to interact with me, but I'm like, and you can pretty much tell pretty early on where a person is in their thinking. If somebody because there will be people who come at you wanting to prove their point. I don't really you can talk. I could talk back, but you're not going to listen to me. So you good. I hope you enjoy your life that matters. I think we got like 3 minutes.
What would you say is the ultimate goal of Black Lives Matter?
I think, it started as an attempt to draw attention to systemic racism. And I do think the ultimate goal is to break down systemic racism, honestly, by drawing attention to it. It's one of those things where, like, if you don't realize there's a tumor in your leg, you can't get it out. So the initial thing was about drawing attention to issues of police brutality, drawing attention to racial profiling and how big of an issue it is, especially when it comes to law enforcement, drawing attention to discrepancies in the criminal justice system. And with the drawing of attention, I think that the goal is to eventually get legislation passed to change some of these things. And yeah, it's about agitation. That's what activism is, It's about stirring the waters so that people are kind of forced to pay attention. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nic, for your time. I am going to ask that you guys come up and sign the sign-in sheet up here at the front table before you leave, but thank you. Ms. Stone has a few more minutes. We're actually going to be in the hallway outside the library where she's going to be able to kind of talk to you a little bit one-on-one and maybe take some photos, okay? Thank you so much for your time.